This video is sponsored by Describe. How can you make a supernatural deal as enticing as possible to your player characters so there's at least a reasonable chance they'll make a deal with a powerful creature during your campaign? A few months ago, one of my Patreon supporters commissioned a video. I actually have a few of these in the queue that I need to get to. You're going to start seeing more of them over the next couple of months. But my Patreon supporter, Yanverb, asked me to make a video about making deals with creatures like hags and devils. They said that they love to run these monsters in their games, but 99% of the time, the players won't even consider making a deal with these creatures. So Yanverb was wondering how we can make these deals more appealing to our players. Is there a way to make these seem like not just reasonable offers, but to maybe even make them the exact solution our players need in order to solve their problems? And in my most recent episode of Critical Role Demystified, we saw one of Matt Mercer's villains offer just such a deal. The corrupted archfey Sondor tried to recruit Vex to be his constant companion, and she very nearly took the deal. And so we're going to talk about how you can potentially get your players to at least consider the deal that your powerful, shady NPCs offer them. A quick disclaimer. I don't know your players. I think I know the typical 5e player pretty well, if there even is such a thing, but that's based purely on the types of stories D&D 5th edition tends to encourage you and your fellow players to tell. That obviously doesn't mean that I know what every game table is like. So of course there may be some suggestions in this video that you think wouldn't apply to your group. Some players and groups are a lot more willing to make supernatural deals than other groups. For example, in the episodes we've covered of the Vox Machina campaign so far, Tiberius made a deal with a hag in the pre-stream games. The party also made a deal with a devil, also pre-stream. Vax made a deal with a hag in episode 20, then he made another deal with the Goddess of Death in episode 44, and in the Feywild, they effectively pressured a Fey creature into making a deal to be their guide. Garmelie had no interest in helping them. They're the ones who pushed for it and wound up making a deal that they had to find a way to wriggle out of in the next episode. And there'll be more deals with sketchy supernatural creatures coming later in the campaign, to say nothing of campaigns 2 or 3. So the point is, these players seem to love making deals with powerful entities, and we can't assume most players are going to be quite so gung-ho about that. So for the purposes of this video, we're going to assume your players have a healthy sense of skepticism about any arrangement offered by a powerful supernatural creature of dubious morality, but that they're also not just going to plant their feet and flatly refuse to hear out anybody making such an offer. If that does not sound like your players, then you might have your own advice for tips I don't cover in this video that could help sway other types of players toward a tempting deal. So I encourage you to leave those suggestions in the comments below. There may be other GMs in the same boat as you looking to adapt my advice toward more stubborn or paranoid players, and I would love for you to share any insight you have on that subject. Now, before we talk about how to tempt your players with some sort of supernatural deal from a sketchy supernatural figure, let's talk about why you might want this. So in order to do that, let's discuss how the supernatural deal tends to work in fiction, because that's really what we're talking about today. We're taking a trope from fantasy and folklore and putting it in our games. Typically, in these moments where the characters and stories make some ill-advised supernatural deal, the characters are pursuing something that they want, but not what they need. They want money or status or a shortcut to their ultimate goal, but their character arc is to actually learn a lesson from this moment and overcome whatever is tempting them to make the deal. For example, in the episode of Gravity Falls, where Dipper makes a deal with a demon, yes, you heard me right, Gravity Falls included a literal demon that offered supernatural deals. That show kicked ass. But in that episode where Dipper takes a deal, the way the demon convinces him to do so is by driving a wedge into Dipper's relationship with his sister. What Dipper should have done is prioritize his sister rather than take her for granted. He eventually learns that lesson at the end of the story, but if he'd learned that at the beginning, then there would be no story because he would have known better than to take the deal. Or let's look at something like the Brendan Fraser remake of Bedazzled. Elliot is a dork who keeps pining for a girl who is not interested in him, so he keeps making deals with the devil so he can be more cool, more handsome, more successful, all these things that he wishes he could be so the girl he likes will actually like him back. But of course, making a deal with the devil is always a bad idea. A hot take that you'll probably hear a few times in this video. So, in the movie, it never works. Not only is there usually some unexpected twist to the deal that ruins it in some way, and we'll definitely talk about that later in this video, don't you worry about that, but also the girl he likes never likes him back in any of these scenarios. Because the lesson of the movie is, don't change who you are for someone you like, because not only would there be some disastrous consequences, but also, it's not even going to work. Move on, do the work to actually improve yourself and find someone who actually likes you for you, and not for all these flashy gimmicks. And also, don't make a deal with the devil. That's another moral of the movie. Probably not one that comes up in everyday life, but you never know. Someday you might be in a situation where Mephistopheles offers you everything your heart desires in exchange for condemning your immortal soul to eternal damnation, and you'll realize, wait a minute, I saw Bedazzled, so I know this is a bad idea. Nice try, Beelzebub. And to be honest, when we're translating these supernatural deals to our games, I think we need to remember that essential element of this trope. These deals are always a bad idea. So we want to preserve that. And I think this means reframing the question a little bit. We're not asking ourselves, how can we make this deal as appealing as possible to our players? What we really want, at least in my opinion, is to instead ask, how can we make this deal as appealing as possible to our players so they are truly tempted to take the deal despite knowing it's not a good idea? I think that's something that was present in my patron Yanverb's question. They didn't precisely spell it out this way, but when they said, my players never want to take the deal, it seems like that's because the players know they shouldn't. And that means we are already halfway there. As soon as a devil or a hag or even an archfey offers a deal, your players should be skeptical. They should be reluctant. That's the point of the trope. That means all we have to do is sweeten the pot. Make the deal as tempting as possible so the players can really struggle with the decision. Even though everything is telling them, don't take this deal, you just want them to at least still consider signing on the dotted line. In The Little Mermaid, Sebastian and Flounder warn Ariel not to take the deal. The whole second half of Ursula's song is about how Ariel is a desperate, pathetic loser for taking the deal, and Ariel still signs the contract. Not because Ursula tricked her into it, but because she was offering something that was too irresistible for Ariel not to take it. But of course, it's ultimately up to the players to decide whether or not to take the deal. You can't force them to do so. Because if you do force them into it, if you manipulate the situation so you're the only possible course of action is for your players to take this deal, and then they truly have no other good options, then that's not a choice, it's an ultimatum. It's a stop on the railroad track of your story. And there's nothing wrong with a little bit of railroading from time to time, some of that can honestly be fine, but the core fantasy of the magical contract is temptation. And temptation doesn't work if the players essentially have no other choice. So we are not trying to force them into a deal. We're just trying to get them to consider taking a deal that they know they probably shouldn't take. Whether they do take it or not is ultimately not even the point. The point is the temptation. Now, there is an exception to this rule. There is a scenario where you can essentially guarantee your players take the deal, and that's when the deal is incorporated into the player's backstory or used to explain some new ability gained on a level up. And in this situation, it's really best to talk this through with your player, not just to make sure that they know what to expect from the deal, but also to make sure you know what they are hoping for. Because there is a ton of narrative potential in these supernatural deals, and sometimes your players want to incorporate that into their journeys. This is part of why the Warlock makes for such an exciting multi-class, because anyone can imagine their character making a deal with some sort of powerful entity and using that as a way to justify not just getting some new powers, but also finding a new direction in their life. Because we've all seen that moment in movies and TV, and so some players want to explore that idea with their characters. Now, sometimes this moment is the inciting incident for a story. And in these cases, the deal would be in the backstory of the characters. The deal with Dr. Facilier and the Princess and the Frog sets the events of the film in motion. Ghost Rider's backstory is just, I made a deal with the devil. And this is the kind of thing your players might bring you. And they can incorporate these moments into their backstory, and you can work together to figure out any details you need to know as the game master, so you can incorporate this element into your games. However, they might also want to tie this trope into their most recent level up. And that's where you really need to talk to them. Because, as we'll discuss later, it's one thing for there to be some unexpected aspect of the deal that the player character didn't understand, and that can definitely be a thing. But it's another thing entirely for the deal to screw them over in a way that will ruin their fun. For example, let's look at the Princess and the Frog. Dr. Facilier chooses his words very carefully. He promises Prince Naveen that his future is green, implying money, and promises Lawrence that he will be exactly who he's always wanted to be, implying power and revenge. However, if you're Prince Naveen's player, this is part of your backstory for how you got turned into a frog before the campaign even started. If instead this was something the GM just sprang on you, like you made this deal and they just said, "Haha, you're a frog now, sucks to suck," well, that would probably not be very fun for the player. Likewise, if your character is playing Ghost Rider, theoretically they already knew that they're going to be a warlock with the Fiend patron, so that's not going to be a surprise to them, even though in the Ghost Rider story he didn't know he'd become an avatar for the Spirit of Vengeance, he just thought he was selling his soul. The player in this case knows more than the character does. However, along those lines, let's talk about setting expectations, because this is actually something that is really important whenever any magical being offers a deal to the player characters. Everyone involved has to know how this deal is going to work. Let's take a look at The Little Mermaid. Ursula lays out all the terms before Ariel agrees to the deal. Ursula says you've got until sunrise on the third day to make Prince Eric fall in love with you, and it has to be represented by true love's kiss. If that happens, Ariel remains human forever. But if Ariel fails, she turns back into a mermaid and she belongs to Ursula. And as payment, Ursula will take Ariel's voice. In Disney's Hercules, Hades makes an arrangement for Hercules to give up his strength for 24 hours. Even when the deal with the devil isn't literal, when the bad guys are just making a deal with any bad guy, establishing all the terms up front is really important. In The Spectacular Spider-Man, the best adaptation of Peter Parker's adventures, don't at me, he's offered a job by the big man, who was standing in for the Kingpin due to rights issues. And the offer is very simple. You can fight any supervillain who is putting lives in danger, but don't fight ordinary crime, and in exchange, here's a briefcase full of cash. But what about The Princess and the Frog, or Ghost Rider? There was clearly a ton kept hidden in those deals. Well, yeah, because those are backstory deals. The characters are who they are today because they were, effectively, bamboozled into an agreement when they either didn't know or didn't fully understand the terms or conditions. But when you're offering a deal during the campaign itself, this is not the point where the deal maker tries to screw over the heroes. This is just the point where they're trying to get the deal signed. Crucially, this is also the point in the process where the heroes can negotiate and potentially make demands. Returning to that Hercules example, Herc is able to add a condition that guarantees Meg's safety. If any harm comes to her, the deal is broken and Herc gets his powers back. That's why it is so important that the heroes fully understand the terms, so they can make requests and try to get better terms for the deal. And that's important because it gives the players an opportunity to talk themselves into taking the deal. If your supernatural entity says, take it or leave it, that's one thing. That's an easier deal to walk away from. But it's another to allow the players to help make sure they're getting what they want, and that the terms aren't worse than they think they could live with. That increases the likelihood that your players will make a choice that they know they probably shouldn't and take the deal because they feel like they're getting the best possible version of the deal. So now let's talk about the deal itself. And the first thing you need to do is come up with a really solid offer for your players. Now I think what the Dealmaker offers should probably fall under one of two categories: a boon or a plot shortcut. The boon is the easy part, as long as you know what your players want and what they feel like they need. Now, I don't know your players, so I can only offer some really general examples and hope that these could help you imagine some options that you could incorporate into your own infernal deals. Maybe the Dealmaker offers to help the players in combat during an important fight. Just one fight of the player's choosing. Or if you don't want the Dealmaker to charge into battle, or you don't feel like they fare well in a fight, you could call in some favors and recruit a powerful ally who owes the Dealmaker a debt, and then the party can summon this ally into battle when the time comes. Or maybe they grant the player the ability to cast a specific spell once a day, or even just once or twice total ever. You can find some inspiration for these kinds of boons in Curse of Strahd in Chapter 13, The Amber Temple. You can look at all the dark gifts available in the different sarcophagi and either steal one of them for your game or use them as inspiration. Some of them are simply something like, you can cast the spell 3 times, that kind of thing. Or here's another idea. Maybe the Dealmaker can just give the players a potion, or maybe even a magic item. When Vax made a deal with a hag in Vasselheim, he was just looking to get a vial of poison he could use on his daggers. A consumable magic item is a great option for a trade as long as the exchange isn't too severe, but more on that in a minute. Speaking of seeking things out, if the players are seeking a resurrection, that could be a great reason to bring them to the Dealmaker. Bringing someone back from the dead is a classic element of mythology and folklore. From Orpheus petitioning Hades to release Eurydice's soul, to Miracle Max and the Princess Bride resurrecting Wesley to spite Prince Humperdinck. Resurrection magic works perfectly for this sort of situation. Again, referencing Curse of Strahd, there's a character who can raise the dead if you go to him and do him a favor first, and you can absolutely just rip that off for your own games. You can even have the Dealmaker provide an ally, someone else who owes them a favor as well, who can act as their guide or help fill out their roster for the dangerous mission to go retrieve the deceased player's soul, or go retrieve the relic they need, either to perform the ritual or just to serve as payment. And that guide can be played by the player with the dead character, so they can have something else they can do during the adventure to resurrect their previous character. You can also have the Dealmaker offer the player character some sort of new skill. In Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, the characters pick up a hitchhiker named Tommy Johnson, who says he met the devil at the crossroads the night before and sold his soul to learn to play the guitar. Tommy is inspired by 2 real-world blues musicians, Tommy Johnson and Robert Johnson, who are both credited with the story of selling their souls to the devil to learn music. And while the metaphysical aspects of the film are deliberately ambiguous and everything apparently magical that happens could also have a mundane explanation, well, the cosmology of D&D tends to be a lot more clear-cut than that. So if you have a player who wants to learn a new trade, like how to play the guitar or, I don't know, how to sword fight better, then you can absolutely have them make a deal with someone who could just give them some new proficiency or a feat to reflect their new abilities. In the final season of Angel, one of the characters basically makes an infernal deal to get a bunch of information, essentially a new proficiency with an intelligence-based skill, something like Arcana or History. Apologies for the vagueness, I'm trying not to spoil this show that's been off the air for 20 years. Now we've covered boons, so let's discuss the other option, plot shortcuts. Because something else that works wonderfully is for the Dealmaker to offer information. And in this case, I'm going to contrast it with the Angel example. In that scenario, the character just gained a bunch of general knowledge. Again, the kind of thing you might represent with a new proficiency. But that's not what I'm talking about now. I'm talking about a scenario where the characters are looking for some specific piece of information, and a powerful supernatural being can get them that information. Or at the very least, can point them in the right direction. Again, looking at the Vox Machina campaign, in a pre-stream game, Tiberius made a deal with a hag in order to learn the location of one of the magic items he was seeking out. The hag didn't just conjure it into her hand and present it to him, she simply gave him a lead on where he could find it. In Hazbin Hotel, Charlie makes a deal with Alistair in order to learn about a weakness she can exploit to fight the invading army of angels. Side note, did that show seriously only come out this year? Having a child has completely destroyed my sense of time. But if you're going to offer the players information, the trick here is for this not to be the only way for the players to get this information. That's why I refer to it as a plot shortcut. If the players don't take this deal, then there have to be other options as well. They could just take the long way. But I have no issues at all allowing the players to bypass the next few sessions of content I have prepped if they take a deal with a devil or a fae or a hag or whatever, because taking that deal means that there'll be some interesting consequences for them. And speaking of consequences, let's talk about the really interesting part of these deals. The cost. What is the player going to have to give up in order to make this deal happen? This, I would argue, is what makes these deals so exciting in fiction. It's also where I personally struggle the most. Of the deals I've offered in my games, for probably at least half of them, I've really screwed up the cost. First of all, the classic example is, I'll give you X or Y or whatever, but then I get your soul. This is such a staple of the genre, and I think it's very tricky to pull this off in D&D. And partially this is because this is a game where the dead can be brought back to life. If you've sold your soul to the devil, then what happens when you die and your fellow players try to resurrect you? Now, this isn't necessarily a deal breaker, and in fact, it could lead to some really interesting stories. In Hercules, Meg's soul belonged to Hades, so when she died, Herc had to go into the underworld and bargain with Hades in order to save her soul. In Critical Role, across the course of several campaigns, there are a couple of resurrections where the deceased character had some sort of contract or other bond to a supernatural force, and so these resurrections got complicated in some really compelling ways. However, I still think making a deal for your soul is maybe not the best option. Now, it's possible you could instead incorporate a time limit, as in, yes, the devil gets your soul, but not as soon as you die, which means a more traditional resurrection might still be on the table. In Supernatural, there are probably a bunch of supernatural deals across the show, but I've only seen a couple of episodes, but from what I do understand, the Crossroads demons tend to make deals like, I get your soul in 10 years, based on the Supernatural wiki that I looked up for this video. Pirates of the Caribbean basically does the same thing. Davy Jones raises the Black Pearl from the depths for Captain Jack Sparrow, but then he gets Sparrow's soul in 13 years. However, once you've made a deal to hand over your soul to some eternal creature when you die, that's your whole thing now. It's going to consume your personality and pretty much every plotline tied into your character. This is where I'm going to offer the tiniest, faintest bit of praise to the ruinously terrible comic book story, One More Day. It's a story where Spider-Man makes a deal with the devil to save his dying aunt, which already sucks on so many levels, but the folks behind the scenes knew the comic would not work if Peter sold his soul to the devil. So instead, Peter and MJ gave up their marriage and all their memories of it, which made this deal with the devil look an awful lot like a reset button that took Peter Parker back to the 70s. What a coincidence. The comic still does not work, as you can probably guess, but I do like the fact that the devil makes the deal that doesn't just trap the hero's soul in a contract where he's going to go to hell when he dies. And again, if we're talking about resurrections getting complicated by these sorts of contracts, any decent comic book writer would know that Peter Parker was going to die again at some point, so having his soul trapped in a contract with the devil would have made any future death and resurrection story a lot harder to pull off. It's one of the reasons they did not go there, I would assume. And honestly, taking a memory from a player character can work really well. In an arc of the Adventure Zone called The Suffering Game, one of the characters makes a deal where he loses a proficiency with a certain weapon. And the DM, Griffin, described the sequence so it really felt like the character was losing a memory. It was really effective. And if you want to make that the focus instead, like, I want to give up this happy memory or this important memory, it could lead to some really interesting role-playing. If you'd rather focus on mechanics rather than role-playing, they could just stick with losing a proficiency in a skill or receive some sort of curse where they have penalties on certain rolls. I wouldn't say that you could take away their main skill or anything like that. You don't want to make it so their character isn't fun to play anymore. Don't make the wizard give up spell casting or the barbarian give up hitting stuff. But if you take a skill they're moderately good at, or a weapon they use sometimes, and you invite them to give that up, then that could work really well because it could get the players thinking about how they would adjust to that and what they might be willing to live without. But if instead of focusing on mechanics or role-playing, you'd rather this deal be tied into the plot itself, then the dealmaker could send the players on a mission, setting up your next D&D adventure. Or, and this is maybe my favorite, the dealmaker can ask the player for a favor to be called in at some point in the future. This is great because you don't have to have your answer right then. You can sit on this and come back to it when you feel like you have something that works. And a favor doesn't have to seem like a big deal, but it can have major ramifications. For example, there's an episode of Batman the Animated Series where a regular guy basically owes Joker a favor. And when Joker comes to collect, all the guy has to do is open the door so Harley Quinn can wheel a big cake through it. That's it. That's all you gotta do. Just open the door. And of course, because we're talking about the Joker, the end result of opening that door is that the Joker tries to kill a room full of people. He's the Joker. Of course he does. And that's the fun of a favor. The player can be asked to do something innocuous, but it can have major ramifications. However, your players might also convince themselves that a favor wouldn't necessarily be that big a deal, and so they might be more willing to take the deal because they talked themselves into it. But the Joker also came to collect on that favor years later, and that's the freedom you get from a favor. You can decide you want to do something with it far, far down the line. Now, this can backfire, of course. Vax's hag never did come to collect that favor that he promised her, because not long after that, he wound up in a contract with the Raven Queen, and so the hag basically left him alone, since it wasn't worth it to get involved anymore. Although it is also possible Matt just forgot or couldn't come up with something that he liked, and that's also perfectly fine, by the way. But I also think this is the cost of asking for a favor. You need to be okay with the possibility that things might not go totally according to plan. Now, I'm not saying you should definitely have your dealmakers ask for a favor. That tends to work better for the kinds of storytelling I enjoy, but You also don't want to make that the default every time the players have the chance to take a deal. Sometimes the soul makes more sense. Sometimes a memory works better. Sometimes you can send them directly on a mission that you've got prepared and can move the story forward into some really interesting territory. But also sometimes your players have better imaginations than you. We're quite far from this episode of Critical Role, so I'll be very vague here, but there is a scene in the future where the party has to negotiate with a hag. And the hag has what the players want, so she basically asks, "What do you have that's worth my while? Make me an offer." And essentially turns into a bidding war of misery. Who can make the best offer to the hag? Whose offer seems like it will create the most suffering and be the most appealing to the hag, while also not derailing Matt's campaign. It was a really tricky balancing act, but it was also a really fascinating exercise because it got the players thinking about what they would be willing to sacrifice. There's actually a similar moment toward the end of Campaign 1, come to think of it, where the players basically make offers for what they think might be fair. And in both cases, when the goal is to tempt the players into at least considering a deal, having them make an offer about how far they're willing to go is a fantastic way to get them on board with the deal, because you're not offering the deal, they are. You're just deciding what seems like a fair trade, because that's the most important thing to get right when determining the cost of a deal. It has to be fair. It has to be proportional to what the players would get.
You have my payment. One soul to serve on your ship is already over there.
One soul is not equal to another.
Aha! So we've established my proposal is sound in principle, now we're just haggling over price.
Price?
This is another reason why making a deal for a soul isn't right for every situation. Is everything the players might bargain for actually worth a human soul, or an elven soul, or a tiefling soul, or whatever? And I can't answer that because it depends entirely on the deal. Your loved one lives and I get your soul is super common because that one makes sense. It feels like a fair trade, a life for a life. I'll help you in battle maybe doesn't earn you the player's soul, but might instead earn you a favor you can call on later. In Little Shop of Horrors, Audrey 2 offers wealth and fame and success if the main character just kills some people, because it's a metaphor for capitalism, which is also why the happy ending of the movie is kind of bullshit. I've never seen the original play, and even I could tell when watching the movie that it was sanitized for the adaptation. It's a fantastic movie musical, the ending just doesn't make any sense thematically. Still good, I get the change, it does cheapen the metaphor a ton. But on the subject of movies about extremely unsubtle metaphors, in Revenge of the Sith, Palpatine offers Anakin everything he wants to save his loved one, but just morally compromises him by, again, convincing him to do some murders. On Thursday, I've got a video coming out that's all about MCDM's Book of Layers, Where Evil Lives, but related to today's topic, one of the villains in the book is the hag Striga Norna, and when she's confronted by adventurers, she offers the party a deal. Each time they bring her a live humanoid to eat, she'll give them a gift from her hoard. Again, give me a life, I'll give you something cool. This step, figuring out the cost, is where it's really easy to go wrong, I think. You can easily offer a cost that is too steep so it's not even worth entertaining the deal, or so easy to manage that the players basically feel like they're getting away with something by taking this deal at all. I know it sounds like we would want the latter, but we don't, because the deal needs to feel consequential when they're taking it, because the fantasy we're conjuring focuses on making an important, possibly ill-advised choice to take this deal. It's one thing if the deal maker offers something that is worryingly harmless, like when Bill Cipher asks Dipper for a puppet, since his sister Mabel has a bunch of them, and so she's not going to miss one. A request like that should make the players worry about what the deal maker would do if they got their end of the deal. Like, it seems too easy, too simple, they should be second-guessing that. We saw that with Garmelie in the Feywild arc of Critical Role. He wanted the players to steal a threshold crest and a hat, and the players kept worrying what he's going to do with those things and what nefarious plans he might have. And that's okay, because again, we want them to feel a little bit suspicious if things seem too easy. However, if the cost is clearly intended to be obviously bad, then you don't want it to be not that bad. Like if the cost of the deal is, I'm going to take away one of your proficiencies, and then they take away the animal handling skill that they never use because they're playing in an urban D&D game, that's not going to have that much of an impact, so the cost is maybe too cheap to really feel as consequential as it should. However, I also think once you put the dealmaker's offer out there, you should stick to it. Obviously, this is not entirely the case if you're asking the players to make their pitches for what they're willing to part with, but even in those examples from Mercer's games, when the dealmaker hears something they like, they lock in. Nope, sorry, that's the one, we're not accepting any other bids.
They say they received a conversation-ending offer.
Tell them I'll go up.
She says they're content.
Of course, once the players do take the deal, then comes the next question. Do you fuck them over? Look, we've all been thinking about it, right? The stories and scenes where someone takes the deal and only later they realize that the dealmaker is actively working against them, trying to undermine them. In Ghost Rider's backstory, the hero makes a deal with the devil to cure his father's cancer, and sure enough, said cancer is cured. And then that father immediately dies in a motorcycle crash because the devil is not a great guy. In The Little Mermaid, it turns out that the lady everyone calls the Sea Witch can't actually be trusted, as she takes human form and uses Ariel's voice to seduce Prince Eric and ruin Ariel's efforts to court him. In Gravity Falls, Bill Cipher drags Dipper's soul out of his body and takes it over, claiming Dipper as his puppet, because again, that show kicked ass. Now, how well this works depends a lot on what story you're telling with your campaign and how well your players react to these kinds of twists. Maybe that Joker example is the best version of this, at least the one that would probably work at the most game tables, because everyone knows there's more to the Joker's plan than just that. They just don't know what specifically will go wrong. It's a known unknown. But a lot of these other examples are essentially unknown unknowns. And I don't know your players and I don't know the tone of your game, so I don't know if this would work for you or not. But in this situation, I would actually encourage you to picture this less like a deal where you're going to screw them over, and more like a villain's evil plan. I'm running a campaign where a villain is preparing for a deal like this, where the players would hopefully take the deal and then the villain would have something nasty up their sleeve. But right now, it's not actually looking like the players are going to take them up on that deal, and so the villain will have to come up with some other tactic to get what they want. I think that's what separates the villain from the deal maker. The deal maker offers the deal, and if the heroes don't take it, then, oh well, you know where to find me. Come back when you change your mind. But the villain has an agenda, and the deal is just one part of that plan. If the players don't take the deal, then the villain is ultimately going to try to figure out some other way to get what they want. This is why, in the most recent episode of Critical Role Demystified we discussed on the channel, Sondor is a villain, whereas Garmelie, aka Artagan, was a deal maker. Artagan almost certainly had a specific and potentially nefarious reason that he wanted the Threshold crest and the hat, but he told the party that he mainly stuck around with them because they were entertaining. On the other hand, when Vex didn't take Sondor's deal to be his constant companion, his response was, okay, then I'll just kill you and you'll have to stay with me. Because while he did offer Vex a deal, he was primarily a villain. Now, I do still think it's valuable for the deal maker to seem sinister and untrustworthy, because I think that helps the players understand the stakes of the deal they're about to take. But really, the major difference between a villain and a deal maker is their motivation, and whether they intend to follow through with other plans if you don't take the deal. Still, I know it can be hard to figure out how to convey that these characters, whether they're villains or simple deal makers, are sinister and powerful. But thankfully, when you're trying to figure out how to depict your NPCs in your game, or otherwise trying to capture a vibe, you can use today's sponsor, Describe. Describe is an Any award-winning tool that you can use to enhance every corner of your games. They have a team of incredible writers constantly coming up with new descriptions that you can drop directly into your sessions. For example, they have a few scenes describing hags, but here's one of my favorites, the one for the Toy Maker hag. She sits hunched over, wrapped in her haggard, weathered robe. The cowl is low over her face, and dry white hair hangs down from under its edge. In the long, bony hands that emerge from belled gray sleeves, she holds a doll and a knife. Around her are carved winged horses, a ball and cup with the ball painted like an eye, and lengths of woven grass, fur, and patterned cloth. She fits a cotton skirt onto the doll and takes the carving knife to its face. Pretty cool, pretty spooky, I like it. And you might want a map of the hag's hut. And luckily, Describe has interactive maps that you can use in your games. And they're compatible with Foundry VTT, so you can start using these maps today. For example, here's a map titled Baba Yaga's Domain, which could easily work as a hag's hut. And if you're building the atmosphere at your tables, you can use Describe's vast library of music and sound effects to create a sonic environment for your players. For our Hag's Hut, there's actually a piece of ambient sound called Swamp Hag Hut that does a great job of immersing your players into your game, with the sound of a bubbling cauldron, a crackling fire, some forest critters chirping in the background, and some low, ominous tones that rise and fall to help build suspense. And Describe is offering a discount to the viewers of this channel. If you visit describe.com/supergeek and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout, you can save 10% off your first subscription payment. Once again, that's dscryb.com/supergeek and use the promo code SUPERGEEK. Thanks so much to Describe for sponsoring this video. Thanks so much for watching. On Thursday, we're going to talk about spooky layers, so make sure you are here for that. And the best way to make sure you catch all my videos is to subscribe and ring the bell. You support the channel financially by joining my Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Any support you can offer, even if it's just a couple of bucks a month, it honestly helps a whole lot. Join my Discord server to be part of a community and sign up for my newsletter to catch all my latest updates. Make sure you're registered to vote. There's a link in the description to check your registration. Double check it. Things change. It's going to get a little wacky this year. Just be thorough. Just double check. Click here to watch my video about the variant covers of D&D 5e and why I'm never going to buy one, even though I'm very tempted because they're all pretty cool. Until next time, play fair and have fun.